All right, so welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Ben Bussey, and I'm joined today by Sridhar, who's Technical Services Manager at DreamFactory. My role at DreamFactory is I head the product development group here. So very excited to talk about API automation for Oracle. So I'm going to start out with some slides and kind of present the story around DreamFactory, give a little bit of context for what we do, talk about the product a little bit and the problem that we're solving. And then Sridhar is really going to focus on showing the features in the product. So we'll have a demo and cover a lot of material, which will hopefully be really helpful to folks on the call today. So let's get started. At a high level, there's a big thing that's happening in technology right now, and we think of this as the API revolution. So traditionally, companies have built applications using really client-server type of technologies. And what's really dramatically changed is the use of REST APIs to deliver data to all sorts of different devices. And those devices can be mobile phones, Internet of Things types of use cases, as well as web applications that are needing to access data on the back end. So what's happened is, modern companies face this urgent need to API enable their business and to build all sorts of different types of applications. It's no longer just a web-centric world anymore. The problem, however, is this transition to this new type of stack, which consists of all sorts of smart devices on the front end, REST and JSON being delivered to those clients, and all sorts of different connections to data sources. This is a very difficult transition, and that's actually what we're going to talk about in depth today, and specifically as it relates to Oracle databases. So key takeaway here, how do you transition from this client-server world to a modern type of technology stack? What we find with our product and really the pain points that we're trying to solve is how do you transition into this world? And traditionally, if you're trying to API enable, say, a database or a file storage system where you need to connect to APIs that already exist, you're doing this by building APIs for each and every new application that you need to get out there, whether it's an internal application for customers or partners. And what happens is you have tightly coupled interfaces. And so we believe strongly, and we want to show this to you today and convince you that really, like, building new REST APIs for every new project is just a really bad idea. And the reason is that the complexity is immense. You have new APIs for each and every product, and there's absolutely no reuse. So you build your API, it's tightly coupled with each application. You deploy that application into production, and then you're unable to use those APIs again for subsequent applications that you need to build. And if you look at this, it's a many-to-many type of spaghetti where each application has its own interfaces built by different teams, different security models. It's costly and very difficult. And one thing I'd like to point out here is there's a constant interface negotiation between the front end and the back end teams, which is very slow and cumbersome, and it really prevents companies from getting things to market quickly and efficiently, and also securely. And how we like to depict this, and we've actually as a company built a lot of our technology because of this problem that we faced ourselves. So if you're building an application that needs to connect, let's say, to a SQL database as an example, designing that front-end application, there's a front-end team implementing that application. That front-end team has API needs. They ask the back-end team to provide an API. It's an iterative cycle, so there's the design, the front-end application design, the interfaces, the APIs, or the REST APIs, the JSON structure, iterate on that, test it, and it's not a one-time thing. There's a constant negotiation back and forth. It tends to be very slow, and this occurs obviously for every application that you're building. And if you think about the context of this, large companies need to build, test, deploy literally thousands of mobile applications. And so if you have to do this cycle each and every time, it simply won't work. It doesn't scale from a work perspective. And one thing that the analysts cover this a lot, really the integration, it takes usually more than half of the cost and time for a mobile application development. So the back-end integration tightly coupled is not a good idea. So that's where DreamFactory comes in, and we try to solve this in a very unique way. So we'll talk a lot about the technology today, but at a high level, DreamFactory is an open source runtime platform. So it's a piece of software that you install. It is built to instantly generate REST APIs, so you don't have to write REST APIs. These REST APIs are reusable. We'll talk a lot about that, and we're really going to cover in the demo the Oracle-specific APIs, but the model of the technology and how it works applies really to any type of SQL database. So high-level things to take away, automatic generation of APIs. You just connect to your Oracle database, and then you can build mobile applications, web applications. You can do IoT types of use cases as well because it's just REST and JSON. It runs on any server, so we don't host this for you. We're not a backend as a service company. We provide software that you can install wherever you want on a server, that data center, private cloud, public cloud, hybrid, however you want to deploy it. And really, what it lets from a business perspective, it lets companies monetize or use the data and the services that they need to expose, whether that's internally or externally, very easily without disruption, and that's really, really important. So when we talk about production databases, we provide a non-invasive approach, so you don't have to touch that database or change it. We just REST enable it very quickly and easily. And then the other key thing is we also provide we call it a developer portal, but it's a bunch of additional functionality, so it's a lot more than just the APIs that we deliver. There's an entire security model around it and a bunch of sophisticated functionality to actually deal with the 50 to 75% of work that you saw on the previous slide that's backend integration. We try to remove the heavy burden of all of the backend integration that you need to solve. So at a high level, what we do, we automate the API economy. So API automation is an important concept to talk about today. The automation, we think of it as there's benefits to developers who are building applications, and also really key benefits to IT, so the operational folks who need to manage applications in production. And the benefits to development teams, whether you're an architect or you're a DBA that needs to expose APIs, or you're a front-end developer building mobile applications, it's really about simplifying the work so you can focus on just building the application that you need to build. And the net effect of that is, not having to manually build APIs, design, test, takes a ton of time away from development process, so you can focus on building the user experience that's important and not having to deal with the plumbing. Agility, so this idea of decoupling your app from server-side infrastructure is really important, so getting rid of the spaghetti effect, so having a platform where you can expose APIs in a way that they can be used by many applications in a way that's highly reusable is really important. Normalization, so the idea of being able to swap out databases, so you can think of different companies virtualize different things, like VMware virtualizes, operating systems in a sense. We virtualize services, i.e. APIs, so you can swap out databases without disrupting your applications, meaning you can go to different database vendors very easily without rewriting your front-end application. Portability is really important, so you can move your apps between any server, infrastructure as a service or platform. You can use Docker as well, and we'll talk a little bit about that, but how does your development lifecycle work? DreamFactory is very flexible because you can install it on Linux, Windows, even locally on a computer, Mac OS, or Windows or Linux. It supports all of basically every major operating system. And then for the IT part of the company, there are a bunch of key things. So developers adopt new technologies, they like it, and then obviously the IT part of the organization naturally asks the questions around standardization, security, compliance, and governance. And so by standardizing these APIs, and this will become more clear in the demo, you're using one API platform, which gives you consolidated control. You know what your endpoints are. They're all documented. You know the security permissions with role-based access control and so forth. And because everything is recorded and audited, you have an audit trail of everything that happened with this platform. And then lastly, from a governance perspective, there are very rich security features, so you can know exactly who has access to what and actually control security at runtime, which is really, really important feature. Control it on the server side and not on the client side. So DreamFactory Services, if you haven't used the product yet, this is a quick overview of what it is. So DreamFactory is the software that's depicted in this diagram in orange here. So at the top, we have a bunch of applications that you're building. That we provide example applications to get developers up and running quickly. And those applications, it could be native mobile applications or HTML5 applications wrapped for mobile devices. They could be desktop apps running in the browser, let's say with any JavaScript-based technology or framework, MVC framework. They could be IoT. We have some exciting announcements around that with things like MQTT integration coming up soon. Because REST is very broadly used, it's widely applicable to all of these different client-side technologies. So DreamFactory runs in the middle. It auto-generates APIs, which we'll talk about in detail. That's the kernel or the central thing that it does. It provides a scripting and customization capability with different programming languages, such as JavaScript, Node.js, PHP and Python, and we have other languages on the roadmap as well. This lets you customize any of the API endpoints on the request and the response, and you can also write custom scripts. In other words, you can write your own APIs if you need that as well. And then security controls, and this really runs everything from role-based access control, which we'll dive into quite a bit of detail for Oracle, as well as things like the JSON web tokens for managing sessions, and a whole bunch of other integrations with things like OAuth, ldap, Active Directory, and things like this. So there's a front-end application that developers and team leads at your company can use to manage all of the software. It's also, all of the features in DreamFactory are themselves API enabled, so that's highly flexible. So, and we'll talk a bit about that. So there are APIs, and then there are actually, the APIs to your raw data, but there are APIs for all of the actions in the user interface of DreamFactory itself, which is very powerful. And then the last thing on the bottom is what is the data that you're connecting to? And this could be SQL, which is very common. So there's a SQL database you need to connect to and build a mobile application for. It's very simple how you set this up. We'll talk about that. Put in a connection string, and DreamFactory will connect to Oracle and auto-generate these APIs and then give you the scripting and security controls on top of that. Key takeaways here, instant APIs, remember that. You don't have to write your API for Oracle to build your application. Removes a lot of work. And then the other key idea here is the idea of a dev portal. So the environment in which developers work, you can easily expose APIs to teams of developers and then actually deploy your applications easily between development, test, and production. We'll talk a little bit about the packaging capabilities of DreamFactory as well. So a lot of functionality that just works out of the box, and then, of course, the power to customize with scripting everything you need, and really built-in security, which you don't have to write by hand. So that's high level. Digging a little bit more into the details of the platform, one of the key things we'll talk about today is how the API actually works. It's really, really powerful. So what basically DreamFactory does is when you connect to Oracle, it interrogates the database and exposes a whole bunch of functionality, and that functionality is actually embedded in the structure of the API calls. And it's done in a way that's parameterized, so there's actually a relatively small number of endpoints. For an Oracle database, there are 45 distinct endpoints, and those endpoints are wild-carded with things like table names and field names. So you simply pass in what you're looking for. The server where DreamFactory is running, the API version, the database, which is basically the API name, the object that you're looking for, and then any type of parameter. And so the parameters have all sorts of support for Oracle functionality: rollback, commit, pagination, sort order, complex filters with unions and intersections, schema access, so you can programmatically actually manage schema. Stored procedures and functions are built in as endpoints as well, so you can reuse existing functionality that you've built and you don't want to touch. If you have complex stored procedures, you may want to leverage those. Related objects is a huge area that we'll cover, so the idea of foreign key relationships, folding that back into JSON objects that are simply, quite simply returned to the client, simple in the sense that they're easy to traverse and use. alter the data on the client and then actually post back or put back the related objects back to the data store in Oracle. And then another important concept I'll cover in the next slide, which is virtual foreign keys. This is a powerful construct where you can impose relationships without changing your schema. So this is basically dealing with relationships in the middleware itself. So we'll cover this in more depth in the demo today. I do want to speak a little bit. This is an important concept. One thing that our customers have really driven us to build is this idea of being able to connect disparate data without actually writing code. And so the idea here is we have a facility in the product. We call this data mesh, but it's really the construct is a virtual foreign key. And what it does is it lets you call, let's say, an Oracle database and pick a field that's actually not a foreign key. And you can basically connect tables within that same Oracle database that are not connected by foreign key. You can connect disparate Oracle databases that are on basically different database servers. So obviously they don't have any type of relationship because they're not the same database. And then you can actually connect disparate databases of totally different types. So you can connect data that's in Oracle to a database that's, let's say, Postgres, MySQL, IBM DB2, some other database of a different vendor type, or it could be a NoSQL data store like MongoDB. So in this simple example, you're basically making a call to myserver.com, v2 Oracle, and you're fetching data, the contacts table in Oracle, finding a particular ID, in this case ID 33, and then passing in the related parameter orders by email. And basically that orders by email is a foreign key relationship that's not in the database at all. We just made it in DreamFactory. And what that's going to do is it's going to actually fetch orders in a MongoDB database that has the same email address as the person that's on that contact 33 record. So this is a powerful construct. You can also do this with things like server-side scripting, but this is a very easy, convenient way to implement sophisticated data meshing without writing code. So we'll talk a bit about that. Before I'll wrap up quickly and go to the demo, but just want to point out a couple more things. How does DreamFactory work from a implementation standpoint? So installable software, you can get it on GitHub, you can get it on Bitnami, one of our partners, where you can try it out. We'll talk about other ways you can get it to try it out as well, just from our website. Once you decide to implement it in a production environment, you install it wherever it needs to be installed. And let's say that you have an existing stack of software, you've got app servers running, a bunch of APIs, service-oriented architecture, maybe a bunch of HTML applications. DreamFactory doesn't need to mess with any of that or alter any of that at all. The way it works is you install it and then you connect it with the APIs themselves. So for example, if you have LDAP integration or Active Directory needs, DreamFactory will connect to your AD server securely and match those access rights with DreamFactory's native role-based access control. Business logic, you can move into the scripting engine very easily. You can import existing scripts if you need to do server-side scripting from basically where that would resist in an app server. You can connect to things like SOAP interfaces and return REST and JSON programmatically, just given a WSDL. So it automates that whole process. So if you think about it, it's a piece of software that you install, and it does all of that integration for everything from REST APIs to lightweight orchestration, really for REST API services. So providing REST enabling all of your Oracle data stores and providing interfaces that front-end developers can just get, they're documented, they work, they're live, and that's really all there is to it. So with that, we will hop over to Sridhar's demo and show a bunch of the Oracle functionality in a lot more detail.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ben. I have the ball. All right, so you folks should be able to see my screen now, so let's jump right into this. Now, before I jump into and talk about some of the features here, just a quick set as to what we are looking at here. So I have DreamFactory installed on an Amazon EC2 instance, but as Ben mentioned, this is a product that can be pretty much installed anywhere. I have it going on EC2. You can put it on a Google or a Rackspace cloud setup that you might have, or if you say, you know what, we don't want to put it on a cloud, I want to put it on an on-prem server, that's absolutely okay. Or if you want to try it out on your own laptop, that's okay as well. this is something that you can install anywhere and then connect to any data source. And in this particular webinar, we're going to focus on how you connect to Oracle and how you can get the goodness that comes out of DreamFactory. So with that said, let's go right into this. So what you're seeing here is I've already set this up in Amazon EC2, and then I'm looking at services. Services are your data sources that you're connecting to, and then we go in there and virtualize the data source so that way you can move things around and not lose anything. I have a whole bunch of data sources defined here: email services, MySQL Server, MongoDB, some REST APIs, some SOAP services, things like that. I also conveniently have an Oracle instance configured. The configuration is already done for you just to kind of move things along. All the host and the port numbers and setup is already done for you. But once I have this DreamFactory software connected to Oracle, we do some pretty interesting stuff. Namely, we introspect the database to figure out what tables are there, what fields are part of it, what stored procedures, functions are there, and such. So just to kind of quickly show you what I have going here, to move over to the schema tab, I'm going to select my Oracle server right here. Immediately I get a list of tables that are associated with it. I kept it kind of small here just to show you how things are set up. I can go to any table right here and then see the portions that are part of it. Information about the table itself, if you want to alias these tables because you don't want to expose the table name itself for security reasons, or because the table name is kind of complex, you want to make it easier for your customers. You can absolutely do all that stuff through the alias mechanisms. And then basic stuff like labels and plurals and things like that, and the list of fields that I have part of it. And my ID is marked as a primary key right here. Right? So we figure all this stuff out by introspecting your database and loading all that schema into DreamFactory, and that's what we are using to create that REST API instantly. Along with that, we also go in and figure out all the foreign key relationships that you have defined by default. So I have 3 other tables right here that look up to this contact table right here, and then have a foreign key constraints. So we figured those out and then display those out for you as well. Right? Now, with all that stuff set up, how do I actually go in and use this? So first, before you go in and use that, let's go in and see how we help you document what you currently have. So we conveniently have a tab called API Docs that generate these REST APIs and give you those URLs that you have to connect to and things like that. And we help you document that stuff using Swagger. Right? Swagger is the most widely used documentation mechanism for APIs. So we said we would use Swagger within the product as well. So with that, if I go into Oracle, and you can see all the other services I have defined here as well. If I go into Oracle, I have all the operations that we automatically generate and expose to you. Like Ben mentioned, every part of Oracle is now available through our REST APIs that are automatically generated for you. For example, you can now do schema operations. Now, you can create tables, you can delete tables, you can update tables and things like that. You can do the same with data elements. You can delete records, you can get records, you can create records, things like that. And other parts of it that everybody wants to know about, so we'll cover that as well. Stored procedures and functions, right? You can both call them, get them, create them, all that good stuff from within DreamFactory. So that way you can, in essence, go in and manage your complete Oracle infrastructure through DreamFactory as REST APIs. Right? And one of the things that is very interesting about the DreamFactory APIs is, look at that. All our table names are all wildcarded. Now, what does this mean to you? It means when you go in and connect to your Oracle database, you now have the facility of immediately bringing the table structure in and creating REST APIs out of that. But as your table structure changes, let's say I have 700 tables today, I add 50 more next week, I don't have to write any code to bring those additional tables in. All I have to do is just go into DreamFactory and say, hey, clear your cache, get new information there. When you clear your cache, we immediately go in, pull up the updated information that's in your database, and create appropriate REST APIs for that automatically. No additional intervention needed from you, no coding in Spring, Hibernate, any of that stuff needed. It's automatically done for you, right? So with that said, makes your life so much more easy to manage new things that are coming in and things that are getting updated. So let's go into one of these things, see how it's all structured. When I go into one of these structures here, it's very SQL-like. We have tried really hard to keep it very SQL-like, so you can go in and say whatever table I'm looking for. So in this case, I'm looking at the contact stuff, so I'll just place the contact name there. So here I am declaring that I'm interested in the contact table today, but other SQL-like features are automatically taken care of by DreamFactory. You can decide what fields you want. Like Ben mentioned, we automatically take care of foreign key relationships there, and that's what we saw as part of the schema tab as well. You can get related structures. You can execute complex filters. You can put limits. You can paginate through your data. We automatically place a limit of 1,000 records per page. That's a configurable limit, so you can go in there and change the environment to ask for more information or less. But even within that, you can place limits to say, I want only this many records as part of my response back, and then offset so you can page through all that stuff. You can order your record set. So very, very SQL-like, order stuff, group stuff, and things like that, and then get some results back, right? So let's actually try some of these things just to see how this works. Now I'm asking for a contact table, and when I simply do a try it now through DreamFactory, it actually is going to my database and then bringing information back. Here is very similar structure to what Ben was showing you there. Here is my server. Here is my version. Here is my service name, which I conveniently called Oracle. I'm calling for a table, and here is my name of the table. When I request that, it's bringing back all my information as JSON. First name, last name, image, URL, Twitter, all that good stuff is now brought back right here. But that's obviously a lot of information. I want to put a limit on that stuff. Extremely simple. Just say I want 10 records, then you get back only 10 records, right? And I talked a couple of times about bringing back some related information, and if you look at the structure here itself, it's bringing back information only from the contact table, right? There is no information about any of the related stuff because we didn't ask for it. We didn't ask for any of the related information. So let's just make it easy on ourselves and just say, I'm asking for 10 records, but as part of those things, bring back every related information. So if contact, remember I had 3 related tables there, so it's going to bring back information across all of those 3 tables there for the 10 records that I have. Oops, conveniently put that in the wrong place, didn't I? There we go. So filters is not there. I'm putting a limit of 10. Now when I make that request, it's going to Oracle there and then coming back to me with the same kind of URL, v2 Oracle table contact, but the URL parameters tell DreamFactory what are the additional things to do there, and it brings back the same 10 records. But now, let me move that up a little bit so you can see this better. There we go. The same record as before, but now look at that. I have related information brought back to me as it relates to this particular record. And this is by contact group relationship, contact group, and contact info. So it's going in and fetching information from the child records, child tables itself, and then bringing back all related records. So if there are multiple ones that relate to that, so for contact info, there is a home address, there is a work address, and there is a mobile information, it brings back all the related information so I can consume that appropriately, right? And it's doing that for every record that I have there up to the 10 limit that I have placed. Now that's great. How do I go in and place a limit on that stuff, right? How do I place a better filter on this information? Filters are just like you would with SQL. It's very, very SQL-like. So I can just say last name equals Huang. Now, exact same thing goes out. Again, the filters are placed right here. So these can be as complex as you want them to be. And I get the same information back, except it's now directed with the last name equals Huang only. So it's very targeted, extremely limiting there, and I can page through the stuff. I can cut down any unnecessary chit-chat that's going over without me having to manually sit there, construct that SQL request there, nor do I have to sit down and construct this API manually, code anything to bring in related tables. None of that stuff. It's automatically for by DreamFactory. Right? So a great way of coming in and bringing a whole bunch of interesting information there, and this always can be ordered and grouped and things like that, just like Ben mentioned, they're extremely flexible to do. And typically I get a question whenever I start talking about the stuff, dude, you're going in and bringing all related tables. How do I bring only one related table and some fields out of that? We can absolutely do all that stuff through this interface there. I can just specify which relationship I'm interested in, and I'll fetch the appropriate related information only, except as opposed to getting everything. Right? Now, that's great. One of the things that we wanted to extend that with, and Ben talked about this feature as data mesh. What you are currently getting by default with related is it's understanding foreign key relationships and then coming in and bringing related data. But what happens if you do not have an established foreign key relationship? What happens if you are having a logical relationship and you want to bring information across that logical relationship as well? For example, you might have your contacts in one and then the related social data in a completely different table, but there is no logical relationship there. You need a facility to go fetch that information, and that's what the data mesh feature was designed for. But what happens if that data is in a completely different database? So a lot of our customers have their CRM data in one database, but their warehouse information in a completely different database. Maybe some order information is in Oracle, but your warehouse information isn't SAP SQL anywhere. You need the ability to go across databases and bring back related information as well. So we took care of that. And let's see how to do that very simply without doing any coding. So I'm going to come back to my schema, select my Oracle server here, select my contact table, and I can see the fields that are related to that. And what I have here is I have created another table within my Oracle server here called contact social, which has another ID that relates to the contact ID that I have defined here. So what I'm going to do is just overload my primary key and say this is now going to be a foreign key. Now once I define a foreign key here, it asks me to select the table. I can go in and say, hey, it's going to be the contact social, and it's going to connect to, and okay, there we go, it's fetching the information. It's going to connect to the contact socials ID field, so that way I can return Twitter and Facebook information as well. But Sridhar, what you mentioned there was what happens if I go across databases. Can I do the same deal? Absolutely. this is where we have a virtual key reference defined. When I have a virtual key, a virtual foreign key there, but it's actually going across a foreign service, so I can go in and say, hey, this is going to go in my MySQL server to a contact social table. So it's from Oracle. It's going to go over to MySQL and fetch related information through this reference I have set up, right? So this is not modifying my schema itself. It's actually only updating that information within DreamFactory. So all I have to do is save this information and now come back to docs. Now I can do the same query, but it's going to go query not just Oracle, it's going to go query MySQL as well, and then bring back information. So let's quickly do that. Go into Oracle again, go into my get Oracle records. This is what we saw before. Ask for that same table information, contact, get related star, and limit of 10, just to kind of keep it very simple, yeah? When I try this out, now it's going to go across Oracle and MySQL, bring back a consolidated record set without me having to write any code whatsoever, right? And my server seems to be thinking there. Some network latency going on there. Okay, there we go. It's now back. I got my information back, and I have scroll down a little bit here to kind of help you guys see this better. Okay, now I have my information from Oracle, my contact information, contact group, which I had before in Oracle, contact group, which I had in Oracle, contact info that I already had in Oracle. Now that MySQL.contact social by ID, so it's actually going to that remote database, fetching that information from MySQL. So what we have just done here is fetched information from a different table which existed in a different database, which existed in a completely different database server, even different database server type, and fetch that information back. That kind of data mesh capability we just did within with using just a few clicks without having to write any code. That sort of functionality is extremely powerful, right? Now, as Ben mentioned there, we have the scripting capability to do all this stuff. So you can actually write post-process scripts where you can fetch that information and then display all that stuff as part of your response by writing code. But this gives you a nice way of doing that without writing code. If that's the case, why do we have the capability to write scripts? Because you could do much more than just databases. So for example, we have event scripts that's available to pretty much do anything you want on a get or a post or whatever. You can do pre-process as well as post-process scripts. Pre-process might be like data validation, things like that, whereas post-process might be something more interesting, right? You could have done that, fetch that information from MySQL and bring back, or you could do something like this. Look at this. It's a very simple piece of code. What this is doing is when Oracle there is a post going to the contact table, execute this post-process script. The script, what is it doing? It's fetching data from the record. It's executing that for each record. It's creating a message, and then it's posting that message to a Amazon SNS server. So in essence, for every contact it's creating, it's sending out a notification that, hey, this contact was created, or this contact was created, or this contact was created. So because it's doing that for each setup there, I'm just doing a simple example here just to show you how you can integrate between different service, orchestrate different between service with just a few lines of code. I mean, really, when you look at this, it's one line of code that's sending that information out without me having to do anything else. Everything else is just setting up the data that's being messaged out and such. So extremely flexible ways for me to go in and connect to different services, orchestrate multiple things without having to do much work. That's the power that DreamFactory brings to you. Right? So what we have done thus far is we have created an Oracle service, MySQL service there. We have looked at the schema to see all the auto-generated APIs. We have seen the documentation for that. We have seen how you can script it to extend the normal functionality that you get. Finally, just to kind of wrap things up here, security that comes along with it. Right? Extremely easy for you to create roles to define what kind of access you want to give these guys, select the appropriate service, whatever component you want to give it access to, whether schema service or a particular table, for what aspects of the table you're allowed to do. Are you allowed to do only reads? You're allowed to do deletes and posts as well. This is a standard user, so I had started off with a get. I can now update it with a post and a delete extremely easily without having to write any code there. Remember how if you're doing this stuff through script, to Spring or Hibernate, you're writing a lot of code or updating your permissions table there in the database to figure out what kind of authorization you need to do, all of that stuff. I am doing all this stuff through configuration. Plus, as Ben mentioned before, this is all allowed for through the REST APIs that DreamFactory exposes by itself. You don't have to sit there and play around with the UI. You can do all this stuff programmatically. Just to kind of complete the picture here, whether you want to give them external access or internal access. Maybe you have a permissions table there. For permissions table, you don't want to give external access. You want to give only internal access. A DreamFactory script will execute check permissions for that, return back, and then some other call coming in will have external access to some other table. So extremely easy to turn things on and off. And that's all from a metadata perspective. You can extend that to take care of data authorization as well. What I have done through advanced filters is I'm looking for a column there called owner ID, and I'm connecting that up with a dynamic variable called user ID. In other words, the incoming user needs to own the record. Otherwise, don't return the record back to the caller there, return a 403. You don't have access to this stuff, dude. You need to try again, right? For me to do something like that without DreamFactory would involve a lot of work. And if I have to change that, if suddenly somebody comes up and says, hey, this is not owner ID connected up to a group or something like that, it's extremely difficult to do. Whereas through DreamFactory, I can change that on the fly, all through configuration, right? So easy ways of determining roles, and roles are connected to users through a concept of apps. So that way you get user app role to help enable users to have multiple roles based upon what application they are using. That also gives me the capability to set up guest access. Just in case you have a need for a guest access there, I can enable a default role and then set that up and then move on to let my users use my data without having too many security restrictions. So just to quickly summarize here what we have talked about: service virtualizations, where I can go connect to any type of data source out there. We've talked about Oracle a lot today. You can connect to SQL Server, MySQL, email services, file services, existing SOAP service, REST API, whatnot. You can look at the schema there. You can document that stuff. You can customize your REST APIs using script or extend them to orchestrate multiple services there, and then security facilities to come in and lock down who gets access to what. All of this stuff is provided for through our REST API platform. Let's move over back to Ben.
Great, thank you, Sridhar. Tom, I have a few more slides. Give me the control here. All right, great. Okay, so that was hopefully a really helpful demo for everyone to see the depth of the functionality and to really help you connect your Oracle database and really start building great applications, whether those are web, mobile, or Internet of Things that are connecting just using really robust, documented, easy to use, and reusable APIs. So not just one-off applications, you can use this technology to build many, many applications, and that's why we really think of it as a platform for APIs. So just a couple things before we turn to Q&A. I just want to point out a few links. There's a ton of more information online. Definitely go to our website, describes the features, some case studies of customers in action using the technology. Has a bunch of resources there as well that I'll mention. The documentation you can find at wiki.dreamfactory.com. That has a bunch of tutorials, a bunch of videos that we've done as well that can be helpful if you're just getting started and want to try it out yourself. There's a great community forum as an open source project. We really encourage developers to go on the forum, look around if they have questions, and it's searchable. And if you have questions, definitely don't be shy. We are looking at the forum every day, and other people in the community also can be very helpful as well if you're trying to figure things out. And then lastly, our blog.dreamfactory.com, we do a lot of writing that ranges from tutorials that are very hands-on all the way to some of the bigger picture things that I discussed today around why APIs should really be thought of as reusable things and let developers really focus on building what they're good at, really focusing on the applications. So lastly, thank you very much for attending today. We still have a few more minutes, so we'll open it up for any questions that people have. Our emails are below, so feel free to contact us anytime on these email addresses, or go to our website and get in touch that way as well. So with that, let's open it up to Q&A.
Thanks, Ben. We have a couple questions that have been flying in here. So one is, with virtual foreign keys, can we operate with data with complete CRUD operations?
Can you operate on data with CRUD operations? If I'm understanding the question, it means can you fetch the data and then return it back to the database? I think that's probably the question. So DreamFactory does support both directions on relationships like that with foreign keys and virtual foreign keys. Some of the things that often come up are things like rollback and commit. With a distributed type of setup like that, you don't have full rollback and commit, but it's very robust in terms of being able to do create, read, update, and delete just from a functional perspective. So that's kind of inherent in any distributed compute problem with multiple databases. But definitely, reach out if you have more questions on the details of that, or we can discuss the use cases that you're trying to solve, and our technical team can definitely assist in that regard as well.
Thanks, Ben. Here's a question. How does the API handle security permissions? For example, I saw the schema API in your demo, but we can't give developers API access to production database schema. So how would DreamFactory handle that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Sridhar touched on that a little bit, but let me try to elaborate on it a little bit more. So there are actually multiple levels of security, and the first one is, there are two that I'll really mention. So the first one is the credentials that you use to access that Oracle database. So the username and the password, those credentials have certain rights to the database. So DreamFactory basically connects to that database, uses those credentials, and inherits the security permissions that database already has. So that's obviously the first level of control. Now what's interesting is you can then layer on top of that another level of access control, which Sridhar actually showed a little bit in the demo, and that is each and every one of those endpoints that you saw, you can open up access selectively. So by default, right, a role has no access to those endpoints at all. You have to explicitly grant access. And so the use case for this is generally, think of it this way: you're an administrator, let's say, or a team lead, and you have access to the admin console that you saw. you would then grant access to various roles, and those roles really govern end user access control, so people who are accessing the actual end application that you're building. It can also control developer access as well. So if you have developers working on an application, you can give those developers a specific role, and you can, for example, not expose the schema. So when they open up Swagger itself is just an application in DreamFactory. It's basically running inside of an iframe. You can give them a URL for the Swagger, the live API documentation. They will see those 45 endpoints, the abstract endpoints, but then when they try to make a call, the role access governs what they can and cannot do. So they'll get a 200 back on an API call that they're granted to, but things like schema, if you don't give them access, it's basically a forbidden API call. So that's how you protect it. So that's kind of two levels of control. And then there are other aspects of it. We didn't cover some of our other more operational aspects, but from a security aspect, role-based access control is baked in to the platform, both from inheriting existing permissions and also an additional level of RBAC on top of that. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Ben. So we got a couple more here. We'll try to get to as many as we can. The ldap security integration, is it configured from user?
Is it configured from user? Actually, not sure what that question means. Sridhar, do you have any input on that one? I actually don't. Not following the question exactly.
Don't quite follow the question as well. I think what they're asking is, can we go in and set special permissions for a given user and things like that? If that's that's where the question is coming from, and the answer is yes. You can actually go in and assign a particular role to a particular user based upon that user's definition in ldap. If we are getting it wrong, please clarify or come back to support, and we can help answer that question.
Yeah, by the way, anybody, any technical questions, just email support@dreamfactory.com, and we'll be glad to get you an answer. You can also email sales@dreamfactory.com. Either way, we'll get you a good answer.
The only other, let me just add one more quick thing to that, just to I'm not sure we answered the question, but hopefully we did, but just at a higher level, the ldap and AD integration, it's important to know that basically DreamFactory is a LAMP stack, right? So it actually has a database that has the role-based access control built in. So in other words, there's users, there's roles, and that's all native to our platform. So when we talk about the ldap and AD integration, that itself is an API, so it connects to your AD server or ldap server. And then what basically you can do is you can map the roles that are in AD down to the user level, right? And then those things become stored in DreamFactory as well. So it's kind of a mapping mechanism. So that's kind of an important construct to understand. And then from a roadmap perspective, we're focusing on going deeper into that functionality, so supporting things like AD groups better, providing unions and intersections on role permissions, things like this that we want to build, because when you talk about large deployments, there's actually a lot of heavy-duty permissions that enterprises need to support, and we want to support that in DreamFactory as well, within reason.
Okay, so we've had a number of questions. I'll try to roll those up here about the open source solution versus the silver and gold solution and what the pricing around that is. So maybe you could just give a quick summary of that, Ben.
Sure, yeah. So questions on that. So we didn't talk about the pricing and all this. For more details, you can go to our website and check that out. But at a high level, we provide three things. So open source product is what we showed today. Everything there is not everything. Most things are open source. The things that are not open source, we provide what we call a silver package. And the functionality there that's not open source are the commercial databases. So Oracle's a commercial database, so it's actually not open source. We can talk about how you can try it out. Those are closed source interfaces that we provide there. And really the mapping is basically any commercial database. We charge money for those connections, but if it's open source like Postgres and we think of MySQL as primarily open source, those things, those databases are free and open source Apache 2 license. So basically Oracle, SAP, SQL Server, DB2, things like Salesforce are proprietary. Active Directory is proprietary, and things like ldap and SOAP. So basically, enterprises that are connecting to enterprise databases, we charge money for those connections. Lastly, the gold package, we didn't demo this today, but each of the instances of DreamFactory that you deploy, they run on a server. You can have many, many instances, development, test, production, many production instances, depending on how you do deployment, how many apps you need to support. We also provide a whole operational console, management console for IT departments to deploy many instances of DreamFactory in a multi-tenant fashion, like a shared database server running on the internet, and a whole bunch of operational capabilities. So that is really the gold package, really for large deployments. And if you get started with DreamFactory and then you realize you need to deploy in a bigger way, it's a natural evolution to go to the gold subscription after that. So hopefully that's kind of a high-level answer, but definitely reach out to us if you have more questions. Go to the website to see the whole table of features and functions and how they divide out. But it's mainly the APIs that are commercial that we charge money for.
Thanks, Ben. So we're just about out of time here, but try to get maybe one other question in, and then the rest of these questions, we will capture all of them, and we'll try to get you an email answer, so after the session's over here in the next day. So one question that we have here is about scalability. This user says that their APIs are getting hundreds or thousands of requests per minute. How will DreamFactory perform assuming adequate hardware?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll say a couple things. One, we have some benchmarking results. You can go to our blog and check that out. So we've done a lot of analysis of this. The thing is, when we developed this product, we wanted to really follow the tried and true traditions of how to build scale software. So it works just like any LAMP stack. It's multi-threaded, which is another important thing from a CPU perspective, and the scripting, like V8 JavaScript engine's great for sharing threads that come through. So typical setup, we can advise you on this when you're going to production and how to do it. You can load balance, so you can use Nginx or Apache. We will soon support IIS as well. We see a lot of Windows deployments as well as Linux-based deployments. So you can load balance your API calls. JSON Web Tokens are completely stateless, so you can load balance the inbound API calls. You can run DreamFactory in different ways. It can be distributed, like you can run it in Docker or Kubernetes, for example, or just straight up typical deployment as a LAMP stack, and scale it up and scale it down. And then you can also, from a database perspective, generally, if you're not doing multi-tenant, you'll just have one database server, right? And you can do, what we generally recommend is if you're doing failover and things like that, that's really out of DreamFactory's world. I mean, we support different databases, so it comes with MariaDB, but you can use other databases for the built-in database, and you can use any failover mechanisms that your DevOps folks like to use for failover and that kind of thing. The only other things to mention, JWT is great. We are based on a Laravel framework, which is modern PHP framework. We're moving to PHP 7 in this coming, the next release, which will be out in around June 10th. That's actually a tremendous speed up improvement. Companies WordPress, Facebook, and so forth, they're using PHP in massive deployments, and it's a well-known, well-understood technology for scalable deployments. So that's about it. I think the only other thing, scripting-wise, you can use things like Node.js. That will, people can debate that. It's really single-threaded, so you got to kind of look at where your bottlenecks are. Whereas V8 is multi-threaded, so you really have to kind of analyze it. And at a high level, what we try to aspire to is performance that's in, kind of 250 to 300 millisecond type of response time, and do that economically. And we feel that it's rock solid in that regard. But get in touch with us if you want to understand more on the benchmarks. And we're doing a lot more work in that area to quantify everything and kind of provide recommendations on whether, kind of what size hardware you want to use for that type of load.
Thanks, Ben. I know there's still some other questions in here. We didn't get to all of them, but we've got all these captured, so we'll send you a follow-up email to make sure we get answers to the questions for you. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We very much appreciate it. I hope you got a better look at DreamFactory and how we can REST enable Oracle. And any questions that you have, let us know. And also, Ben, if you jump back to that last slide for everybody as they're signing off here, there's just some great resources here that you can use down the line to get more information about DreamFactory, including our community.dreamfactory.com, which is our forum, which is a great place to go sign up and interact with the community about all of your DreamFactory questions and issues. So thanks everybody very much. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.